Good morning and welcome to the September 26th, 2024 meeting of the DC Historic Preservation Review Board. My name is Marnique Heath, the chair of the board. Public notice of this WebEx meeting and participation instructions have been emailed to the project applicants and the HPO mailing list and posted on the Office of Planning website. The meeting is live streamed and archived on the Office of Planning's YouTube channel. Please be aware that if you're watching on YouTube, you will not be able to provide testimony. Those wishing to provide testimony must register in advance and join via WebEx. I want to ask each board member participating in today's meeting to now turn on their cameras, and I'll do a roll call to identify who's present. Board Member Auerbach.
Good morning. Board Member Auerbach is present.
Good morning. Board Member Bell.
Good morning, Matt Bell, present.
Good morning. Board Member Marzella.
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Board Member Miller.
Good morning, Board Member Miller, present.
Good morning. And Board Member Failer.
Good morning, Board Member Failer, present.
Excellent. I do expect that Board Member Williams will be joining us today, but he is going to be late, so we'll announce his arrival once he is on. Before we begin the meeting, I'll go over a few procedural points. The camera function has been enabled for presenters and board members. So at the beginning of each case, cameras can be turned off so that the focus is on the presentation slides. When cameras are off, each person speaking should identify themselves. I'll first ask HPO staff to present their report and evaluation of the case. Then I'll ask the applicant to present their project plans. HPO has preloaded the plans provided by the applicant and will advance the slides upon request. Following the applicant's presentation, we'll hear testimony from ANCs, community groups, and individuals who have registered to speak. The camera function is not available for those providing testimony. After all testimony has been presented and the board is ready to ask questions and deliberate, I'll ask the board members, staff, and presenters to turn on their cameras. After the board is finished deliberating and taken a vote on the project, cameras can then be turned off again for the next presentation. In accordance with the ANC Act, the Historic Preservation Review Board is committed to giving careful consideration to the community and ANC comments that we receive. Our regulations require us to give great weight to properly adopted written recommendations of ANCs in the matters that come before us. To ensure that great weight is given, the board discusses and addresses each issue or concern raised in ANC resolutions as a part of our deliberation and includes that discussion in the public record of the case as recorded in the live videos of our meetings. Following the meeting on the board's behalf, HPO archives the video recordings on the HPO website, keeping them accessible to the public. They prepare a written summary of the board's actions, which includes a report of our findings and conclusions on any issues or concerns raised in ANC resolutions, articulating with particularity and precision why the ANC's reasons did or did not offer persuasive advice, and post the written record on the HPO website 1 week following the meeting, keeping it permanently accessible to the public. We have quite an extensive consent calendar this morning, and so we're going to begin there. I do want to note that I am recused from the first case, that's A, the Bond Bread and Reco Garage, and so I'll ask that Gretchen take that vote.
Thanks, Chair Heath. Would you like to do that now? I do have comments on the remaining items.
Yes, if you could do A first, and then we'll take, because we need to take that one separately,
Okay.
and then we can figure out if we need to do all the others separately.
Okay, then I'll ask the remaining board members on the call if there are any comments that anyone has on item A on the consent calendar agenda, except I'm not asking Chair Heath because she's recusing herself. Being there are none, I'll call the vote on item A on the consent calendar to move approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, sorry, Matt. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item A passes unanimously.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Yep.
And so now we're ready to hear comments on the remaining cases. We can start with B.
To be here.
And we'll hear from you, Gretchen, and then if others have comments, we'll hear those on B.
The only comment that I had was in the packet of information. I wondered if there was any, I just asked staff again for any documentation during the demolition. If there's any risk or chance of archaeological findings. That area's been pretty heavily disturbed, but I just thought I'd bring it up because I know there's been some discovery in other areas around that site. So that's my only comment to staff on that.
Would you like me to address that? Board Member Failer now. This is Andrew Lewis.
Oh, sure, Andrew. That would be great.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that our archaeologist, Rick Tripoli, is involved very much in this case and is reviewing some related work in the area. So we are very aware of it and are monitoring it for archaeology.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else have comments on B? All right, then we'll take comments on C.
On C, I just want to note that we are not taking any position as a board on any zoning issues that might be related to this site. I'd also recommend, it's not really a preservation issue, but the roof deck is accessed by a ladder, and I don't know if that's legal by code. So the applicants may ask their architect to check that with the building code. And I wondered if the staff could ask the applicants for a preservation plan for the front of the building to restore the windows and the front facade of the building. Most of the focus of information seems to be on the back and the addition, but there does seem to be some work on the front facade and the sides of the building as well.
Hey Gretchen, this is Jack Jones, staff. I'll go ahead and follow up on those points.
Thanks.
All right, anything else on C? If not, let's move to comments on D.
On 3238 Rodman Street, my only comment is in that north elevation, the center window is a 20-foot length of glass, no mullions, no separation. That is an incredibly long piece of glass. Even commercially, that's an expensive piece of glass. So I wonder if that's really feasible and has been discussed with the architect and the owner and the staff about that, because I think that that elevation could do with a little more solidity to be a little more compatible with the looks sort of like a table with just glass underneath it, and unless it's like a point supported glass butt glaze solution, I have some concerns about the constructability and viability of it. But I would be in favor of more like a broader spacing between the windows, just to give it a little more solidity to that elevation and not so much glass transparency.
Okay. So we'll note that for staff.
Yeah, this is Todd Jones with staff. I haven't talked to the applicant specifically about that window, but I will. I'll add that to my list here.
Okay, thanks, Todd.
I don't have any comments on Macomb. I thought the list was good. I'm sorry that I made that mistake.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Not a mistake at all. Anyone else have comments on D or E? All
I
right.
guess just a question on, since the wheelchair lift is in the front, We typically approve those kinds of applications where accessibility is an issue. Is there a precedent for that? Just for my own information.
Good morning, Matt. This is Steve. Yeah, there's nothing in the board's rules or regulations or past reviews that has precluded lifts on fronts of buildings. We try and work with applicants to make them as discreet as possible, but you know, as you know, entry through the front door is the preferred method, and so we try and work out the best possible solution.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Then we'll move on to F. Comments on F.
This is 2750 Platt Court. It's two parcels, parcel 2 and parcel 4. For the building with the revisions on parcel 2, I am glad to see that bridge gone. It was something that staff is right in the report. That was something that the board really had difficulty with and worked as much as possible to make as de minimis as possible, but it never really was de minimis. So I'm glad it's not there anymore. One of the things I noted in the change of materials on parcel 2 is that the stone now is changed to a cast stone at the base, and I'd asked staff to work with the applicants to retain, if it's going to go to cast stone, which can look like limestone, convincingly, to look at the dimensions of those pieces, because I think the relationship of having a stone base and the height of that base is probably the only thing that relates it to the guidelines that were established for McMillan Reservoir. And so I just wouldn't want that to be looking like it's, you know, sitting on in an extreme case, a CMU block or just something that was a regularized block system, because I don't think that meets the guideline requirements.
Great
And then,
point. Yeah,
and then,
thank you.
oh, sorry. And then in parcel 4, because of the change in paneling, parcel 2 in the detail is slightly different than parcel 4. Parcel 4 looks like, I hope this is not meant to be pejorative because I don't intend it to be, but it looks like a series of shipping containers stacked upon each other for this building, and there are broader expanses of those panels. And so if staff could work with the applicants to work out how venting happens for, you know, all the air handling units and fresh air intakes and, you know, dryer vents and all of that for each of the apartments, rather than having it just be randomly punctuated or punctuated in middles of those panels, because I think that's a strong part of the design expression. That would be good. And then I like the parapet before in the previous than rather the raised parapet, in my opinion. And I'm curious what some other board members might think. One of the things that the lower parapet does, especially along the west elevation, is that it makes it seem like a series of buildings rather than one long building. And that was something that was sort of important about the extent of the buildings. So it didn't seem like these big, long, you know, extending buildings, but there's some variation to them to read like individual buildings. And I think that the lower parapet achieves that better than this raised parapet solution. And then my last comment before I ask for any others comment, if anybody else has that comment about the parapet, is the same about the stone at the base. This also has the same replacement materials, and so looking at the dimensionality of what those replacement materials are, I think are important. The increased glazing, I think, is very nice at the base of this building. So I would just ask if anybody else had the same reaction to the raised parapet on parcel 4 building.
Anyone? No. Okay. Sounds like no opinions.
So maybe if it's a raised parapet and it needs to be raised for some reason, maybe the floor to floor has changed or something, maybe staff could work with the applicants to modify the detail of that parapet so it reads like 3 individual buildings rather than, I think it's 3 on that. It reads like the individual buildings more like the original lower parapet did than one continuous long big bar building.
Okay. Any other comments on F? All right, thanks, Gretchen. We'll go to G.
I don't have any on G either. Sorry.
Does anyone else have comments on G? All right, then any comments on H?
The comment that I have on H is that I think the penthouse is too tall. It's 15 feet. The other floors on this building are 12'5" floor to floor. And I'm not clear why the penthouse needs to be 15 feet. It just looks like too tall of a top hat, and that's mostly evident on page 10. I'm wondering if staff could work with the applicants to lower the penthouse height, at least to the floor to floor of what's there. Even if some of the equipment has to pop up, if it's a matter of an issue of, a vent or something popping up, I'm sure that could be arranged and would be less intrusive than one continuous long wall, 15 feet in height. It's just too tall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then the basement exposure on 9th Street, if there's an opportunity to find some way to bring some of those railings back so it feels like the building is a little more approachable. Sorry about that. Is a little more approachable than having, it feels like with the basement and that big area well, feels like you know, and that's the reason that we don't typically approve this kind of condition, is that it feels like the people, as a person, you're not supposed to walk up to that building. But if staff could work on at least with how the railings are detailed and maybe it's some of the vegetation, that would be helpful.
Okay. Anyone else have comments on H? Okay, thanks, Gretchen. I. Comments on I?
That one, I just want to make it clear that the only reason we are approving this again, because it's in our regs that we only give one extension, is because of the staff's citation of section 3207, that what's being requested does not pose an harm to anybody else or anyone related to the project.
Okay.
That's just a bureaucracy thing.
Makes sense. Anyone else have comments on I? If not, we'll move to J. Comments on J?
On J, my only comment is I really agree strongly with the staff report and would hope that all of the recommendations from staff are abided by with the owner.
I second that.
All right. K, comments on K?
Okay. Is that Garfield?
That is 1800 Columbia Road. Garfield's after that one.
I don't have anything on Columbia Road, sorry.
Okay.
I thought I had.
Anyone else have comments on 1800 Columbia Road? All right. If not, then we'll go to the last, which is
Sorry,
26.
Marnie, I didn't get my unmute button.
Okay,
unmuted.
go ahead, Matt.
I just want to say I think it's simpler and clearer, actually.
Mhm.
I appreciate very much the simplicity of the design, and I think they did a good job of working out some of the things we pointed out previously.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm glad to see this one move forward. All right, 2621 Garfield.
On Garfield, I would like staff to work with the applicants to lower the parapet on this one. I don't know why it needs to be so tall. I think the floors are what they can be at to minimize that. But when I went back in this area, I think that there isn't, the consistency like some of the alleys that we have of relationship of garages, and this property being sort of at the inside corner, well, an outside corner of the alleyway. There's a weird angle of how the street cuts the property line here, but I think it sits as best possible as an ADU, but I think the parapet needs to come down at least like 9 to 12 inches. It feels like really, really tall for the second story, proportionately to the first story of the building. So if staff could work with them to lower that, I think that would be important to make it compatible. The other thing that's sort of weird, and this is not a preservation issue, but the grades at the corner are a little bit wonky, where the sidewalk grades meet for the drive entrance and the pedestrian entrance. And I think that could be simplified. It's in view 11 wood siding 3D view. It shows the grade sloping down, and there's this pocket, this low point that gets created at the corner of the building. And I think you probably just want that all to be at the same level as the low point on the garage. Just carry that all the way across and around the side of the building, because it looks like it aligns, at least if the siding is level on the building, it'll align with the threshold of the door around the corner. So you probably want to look at that so you don't end up with water building up against the corner of your building.
Mm-hmm.
Not a preservation issue though.
Okay. Anyone else have comments on that case on Garfield? All right. So that's our last consent case. I'm going to make a motion that we approve cases B through L with the comments that we've heard today, and ask for a second.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Andrew. The motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Great, we can proceed to our first case of the day, which is the Anacostia Historic District Commercial Corridor Guidelines. And Amania, are you ready to present?
I am. Good morning, board. Welcome back. I am presenting today on the Anacostia Historic District Commercial Corridor Design Guidelines. I came to the board, or I presented to the board 2 months ago, a concept for, or a draft for design guidelines for the Anacostia Historic District. I am following up with a final draft of the guidelines after receiving comments from the community, as well as comments from the board from the last discussion, and looking forward to hearing if there are any final alterations or changes that might need to be included, and just interested to hear and looking forward to hear any discussion on it. So for the next slide, to recap, the commercial corridor design guidelines were created to provide additional framework to the Anacostia Historic District preservation guidelines that were already established and being used. These guidelines were specifically for the commercial corridor and gives common language for further community engagement, communication, and the tool to allow for developers and residents to have key design elements and guidance for building along the historic district. Next slide. The commercial corridor is outlined in the dark gray. It starts at, or it follows the base of 11th Street Bridge along 1800 to 2400 block of the Martin Luther King Avenue to Howard Road. And then from Good Hope Road to 13th Street. And 18th Street. So one other fact to note as well is that this corridor, this commercial corridor follows in line also with the future land use map within the DC Comprehensive Plan. Next slide. So what's included into this document are some planning language and maps, elements of preservation design and their definitions, including compatibility, massing, scale, materials, storefronts, and signage. The elements include case studies, which were a part of the previous draft, but I included a couple more case studies as well as images of projects completed. The document includes a frequently asked questions page as well as resources at the end. For the past 2 months, 2 or 3 months, I've had, or HPO has opened up a public input survey for the community to provide comment on the draft guidelines. So we asked questions that asked whether the design guidelines were helpful or if they were able to be understood. And so many found that the purpose of the guidelines were clear. They appreciated the attention to additional detailing, asked for additional guidance on the height, look forward to some accountability with design along the corridor. There were questions about specific building examples, so back to the case studies. Comments on community contact information. So who in the community can residents bring any concerns to, as well as some less preservation initiatives or questions concerning traffic, environment, and bus shelters, so amenities for building outside of or along the public realm. As well as what to look forward in the future. Next slide. So the next steps after this project or after the design guidelines are finalized, it's meant to be still a living document. So HPO looks forward to working with the ANC and community groups to host community meetings and design workshops on these specific elements to break them down and make them more engaging with the community. Ensuring that new and long-term residents are included in the discussion and the concerns of the district. Strengthening partnerships between city agencies and businesses, looking forward to working with DDOT and DOE on sustainability questions and collaboration. So there are some waterfront initiatives and of course the 11th Street Bridge project that's coming along. So looking forward to adding maybe appendices to this plan, this guideline, so that there are if there are additional elements that should be included, including resiliency, that those are fleshed out as well. And then of course, collaborating with community groups such as and organizations such as the Anacostia BID with their Arts and Culture District to try to provide some resources for storefront rehabilitation and maintenance. There were some comments that were provided mostly from the public input. I did receive a couple of emails from residents providing additional interest in following up with the design guidelines, but overall, I received positive feedback from the draft guidelines. I am looking forward to hearing if there are any additional comments that the board has on this last draft, and hopefully ready for getting our developers and our properties owners accustomed to using these guidelines in their work. So I think that was the last one. Steve, one more is just the, yeah. So I don't know if everyone knows, but we have moved. So if there are any questions, you can reach our office here or reach out to me specifically.
Okay. Do board members have any questions? Any questions?
I had a quick one, Chair Heath, about
Sure.
the extent that you went with the boundary of defining the commercial district, specifically down Marionberry Drive. How you decided to stop instead of going to the end of the historic district along Marionberry. Is that because there's a housing project, a lower density housing project there, or how did you decide that that street would be the end of where the end of?
I was including more commercial buildings, and so it does start to go more residential as you go towards like Minnesota and so forth, more churches. And so I was leaving that portion out and focusing mainly on the businesses that were going towards more sort of MLK and down towards Howard Road, which is really experiencing a boom of development. So really focusing on the areas that were experiencing the most development and getting the most attention as far as looking for design guidelines or guidance as people start to find interest in the community.
It looks like, and maybe I'm misreading the graphic here, Amani, but
because you saying it stops at 17th Street, right?
Yeah,
that's where the historic district. Because on the other side of it is not considered the historic district. So the by 17th Street and Marionberry, it kind of stops, and only one side of the road or one side is still within the historic district. Yeah.
But would that south side be part of the area, or no? You think no because, well, at least until 18.
I can include it, but mostly it was just focusing more so on the businesses, but I can absolutely stretch it out that far.
Maybe at least to that corner at Fendel Street, I think might be helpful, because after Fendel Street on the south side, even though that's in the historic district, it's residences that are there. And I'm just looking at like the long range plan for what density is there and the size of the lots. There could be bigger buildings, but I think at least a Fendel might be helpful on the south side of the street. That's like another block and a half, I guess, or half of a.
I know exactly where it is. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
All right. Anyone else?
I'm sorry, Chair Heath. Did you have any comments about not only sustainability in terms of and resiliency in terms of environmental, carbon footprint and that, but did you have any questions or comments from the community about maintaining resiliency and sustainability in terms of understanding of history of race and social development and the heritage of this area of the commercial district?
Actually, not so much. I got more comments about safety, about ensuring that developers understood that this was a historic district generally. Not really getting specific into the details of what culturally is significant about the area, but just that they know. And so how do we keep them informed? Collaborating with multiple city agencies, so ensuring that DDOT knows that they're in a historic district and should also be following similar. So that was more of the concerts or the information that people wanted to provide.
Okay.
Great. Anyone else have questions? We do have both Greta Fuller and Rebecca Miller registered to provide testimony, so we can come back to questions after hearing from them. We can start with Ms. Fuller.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, board. My name is Greta Fuller. I am co-president of Historic Anacostia Preservation Society. While the guidelines are a good start, we appreciate all the work because we know that we've been struggling in our commercial corridor on what should be created there and what shouldn't. So for me, the guidelines did hit quite a few points, but I still had some that I felt like needed to be flushed out. Some of them were very particular to some of the things that we're seeing now. And one, I'm not sure if the guidelines, I'll just go through some of my points. It's not all, but most of them, because I didn't get to really flush out what the guidelines were saying. But I wanted to make sure that I emphasized that we address the intersection between the commercial buildings and the adjacent homes. I know that we look a lot on the main streets like Martin Luther King or Marionberry Avenue to address what the buildings look like, but because the buildings seem to be taller now, we really need to look at how they're addressing the homes that are behind them, that are two-story buildings. You know, a tall building can be very intimidating on a little residential property. So how are we really addressing the landscape, the buildings, the screening or whatever, so that people that live in the homes behind don't feel inundated by an overly sized building, and they still have the privacy that they paid for. Another thing that I thought was important is to clarify the language. We still have a very large vacant lot. For instance, 1234 Marionberry Avenue. It is at the corner of Good Hope Road and Martin Luther King. Well, Marionberry, I'm trying to remember that name now. It's at the corner of Marionberry and Martin Luther King. It's a vacant lot. It really should have been included in the historic district, but for some odd reason, it was not. And what we should have really been doing when we expanded the historic district was complete that corner of Marionberry and Good Hope Road, because that is one of the gateways into Ward 8 and the corner of our historic district. So what kind of language do we really have in that we can help the developer, whoever develops that land, understand that they're not in the historic district, but they should still have some sort of respect or try to work with the community and the agencies to ensure that their property doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. So, and that's just one property, and we have a few more that may be in the historic district that were not captured. Another thing is language that, well, I think Amani had touched on it, that highlights projects that are exemplary and those that just won't work, because now the historic district has been expanded. And for instance, we have a project right across from Ketchum Elementary. The materials, the look and the feel, it just doesn't seem like it actually belongs in the historic district, but people need to understand that that was done before it was expanded. So we need to help developers understand that. What brought me up too, because I keep flip-flopping over Marionberry and Good Hope Road, was the names. And I don't know if that will be part of the historic guidelines, but the name of streets, some of the streets, Good Hope Road to the community was a street. I'm not saying change it back to Good Hope Road. Let's be clear of that. It's Marionberry Avenue, and that's what the people wanted. But we should be very careful how we just change street names, and maybe we don't change them, but make them commemorative, or at least we address what happened on that street. It's known, or at least suggested, that the 11th Street Bridge is where John Wilkes Booth crossed and went down Good Hope Road into Maryland. And now, we've changed the street name, but we lost the relevance of what could and may be in history books, So I would like us to make sure that we address changing different historical parts of the community in the guidelines without reverence to what it was. Perhaps it should be commemorative, or perhaps it should not have been changed. I am not suggesting for anybody out there that we change the name back to Good Hope Road, but in the future, I'm suggesting that we really have a look, or have the ability to look at things like that in the historic district, because it takes away from the character. Also, I've been pushing for bollards for years along the sidewalks because of how the 11th Street Bridge comes across into the commercial corridor at the corner of Martin Luther King and Good Hope Road. I think it's time for us to actually think about putting those, because I've seen countless cars on sidewalks going into buildings, and pedestrians actually at that intersection getting hurt, or just for safety reasons. We should really think about how we can either bollards or some sort of planters or something that we can really protect the buildings that people put a lot of money and time into building. It not only helps with traffic, but it also can help beautify the area and provide, you can have them with lights in them, you can have things, you can have flower planters, all sorts of things that could help the high risk traffic areas. Oh, one of the things that I found that we really had issues with were the narrow alleys. And when we're building buildings, how are we really addressing the alleys? It may not be your position, but some kind of way, DDOT or someone, how are we positioning the buildings that are being built so that we don't have a lot of traffic going into an alley? Or if you do have traffic, that the signage or the alley is wide enough, or if there's a door near the alley, the people that's going in the door to a new building aren't being inundated with somebody speeding through an alley. So I really want to address how we look at alleys in our historic district, and that they don't disrupt the residential environment. I know my time is up, but one of the things that also I wanted to do was talk about like the aesthetics of buildings. Like we have security cameras, we have security gates. Are the security gates on the inside and no longer on the outside of the project of the building? Now we have lights. Some people want to put lights that are solar, but they really don't look like, they're actually really, really large, and they don't look like what should be on a historic building. That we really pay more attention to that, and that we look at window screening or film. I saw some film on windows where it looks like a mirror. So you really can't see inside of the business, but you see a reflection. So are we going to address the finishing, like the film or the tinting of windows? I'm not trying to get really specific, but we shouldn't walk down the street and all we see is film on windows where it looks like a mirror and you're only looking at yourself and you don't know what's going on. And actually for the people, it's kind of a safety thing. But those are just some of the things. I have many more comments on these guidelines that I think are very specific to the cases that we had that came in front of you guys. And I also believe that the Griswold section, we still should be looking at the massing and the density still being lower, not like how the buildings in 1603 and 1605 are being larger. We should still have a smaller, lower density setback buildings from Martin Luther King and Good Hope, Marion Barry, to at least Morris Road. Thank you. And my last thing is I'd like us to have another chance to really work this out with the office, Historic Preservation Office, from HAP standpoint, and see what we can help them incorporate before you make a final decision. Thank you.
Sure. I was just going to ask, just given that you said you had a lot more comments, if you could spend some time with Amania to review your comments with her. I'd hate for you to not be able to share all of your thoughts. Is there?
I definitely would. I will set something up with Amani immediately as soon as she have time, and we can hash through the comments, and sooner better than later. Whenever she can get the time, I will take the time. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Fuller? Okay, if not, then we'll hear from Ms. Miller next.
Good morning, Chair Heath, the members of the board. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm the director of the DC Preservation League. Thanks for taking the time. I'm so glad that Greta went first because she articulated a lot of things that I already wanted to say. I just wanted to just add a couple of things with regards to the document, and and these are pretty minor, and we just looked at them this week, so we haven't had a chance to talk to Amani about them, but I just wanted to bring them to everybody's attention. So in the frequently asked questions, looking at listing the community organizations and everybody that they can contact, especially HAPS and HABA, to make sure that they're all in there. And any additional resources that they might be able to reference, whether it be the window guidelines or any of those types of things. And also, we think that there should be a page that really spells out and defines what design principles of compatibility are. So like setback, height, materials, etc., rather than just kind of having them into a paragraph on page 6. So kind of just giving people a little bit more of a definition of what that means. And also, it might be helpful to have an explanation as to why some materials are not compatible within this historic district, just so maybe to cut down on some of the questions or people trying to put them in and not understanding and making their time for permitting longer. In that vein, I do want to reiterate Ms. Fuller's comment with regards to stepping down to the neighborhoods in the lower residential area. I think that a lot of times the rear of a building is completely forgotten, and when you're having these larger scale buildings along MLK and Martin Luther King Avenue, or I'm sorry, Marion Barry Avenue, that the stepping down to the 2-story buildings behind them tends to get lost. And so if there could be, I know that it's a secondary facade generally, but in this case, you have a lot of the neighborhood that is low scale and seeing the rears of these buildings. So more attention to detail in that matter, I think, would be something that should be kind of sussed out a little bit more in these guidelines. That is our comments for today on that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have questions for Ms. Miller? Any questions?
No.
All right. Thank you both, Ms. Miller and Ms. Fuller, for your time today and always for your contribution to these sorts of matters. We really appreciate your guidance and feedback. So we'll ask that Ms. Fuller continue to work with the staff on hers, and we look forward to seeing the outcome of that. Does anyone else have questions?
Hi, this is Chairperson Miller. I'm sorry, Board Member Miller. I had a question for Amania and the staff making the guidelines. So I was also very interested in how this corridor impacts the residential community. And I wonder, similar to how someone might outline an area of potential effect, if there could be another transparent layer on this map that shows the impact area of a building. So that might be in reference to the height, that might be in reference to what Ms. Fuller was referencing as far as the alleyways and the traffic that might go through them. I'm not sure what we can do as far as making guidelines about those impact areas, but I think even making awareness to and guidelines for the people building businesses here in this district might be something that could be more clearly articulated.
Hi, and I want to say thank you to all the comments. They were very helpful. I did add a note, or I added a small bullet under height and massing that said new construction should provide height and massing transitions to abutting lower scale residential zones. But what I think the conversation sounds like it's talking more about is the sight line or the view of the corridor from the residential area. So what do the rear and secondary, why those are important pieces to still consider in your design. So I imagine what I'm hearing is that we should pull out a separate element that identifies what a sight line is from the residential to the corridor, why that's important, as well as what items for rear elevation and rear facade should be considered that might impact this view. And so that's what I'm hearing for that. It sounds less about actually just the general height and massing, but how it's affecting the residents going onto the corridor. So absolutely we'll pull that out and try to give it its own kind of element for secondary facades and rear facades. And so, which I don't have currently. So I think that, and I will listen. I will talk to Rebecca as well as Greta to make sure that that's clear. As well as I try to move a little bit away from talking about the residential portion only because we have a guideline strictly for, well, not even strictly, but that encompasses a lot about the residential portion of the Anacostia Historic District. So I really wanted to make sure that this guideline focused on the actual corridor and the storefronts and so forth. But I do think that that rear elevation and those secondary facades are important too and should be noted and somewhere in there. So I think that answered your question, if not. But yeah, so I'm definitely going to include those.
Thank you. Yeah, that all sounds great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and Amani, if I could just add to that, I feel like I think that's great. I feel like some maybe visual clues could help aid a user of this document understand that, and specifically looking at some existing as-built examples that do that well. I feel like that would be great to highlight. I'm poking around Google Maps and looking at I think it's the Maple View apartments, something like that, and I feel like that example in particular does a pretty good job of continuing that fenestration and articulation of the facade around to the back. So if
Yeah.
we
There
could
are
include that.
examples. I was a bit hesitant on including too many case studies. One, because everyone feels differently about the successes of certain projects. And so I really wanted to focus more so on the elements that were good portions or reflected well in the project versus if it was the overall best thing to ever happen. So I do think that I try to do that with the cases a bit more. And this is also why I wanted it to be this is a base, and we take this to the community to have these workshops to kind of delve more into more specific elements and specific issues rather than trying to squeeze everything into the guidelines, which might make it a bit more congested. And I really wanted to give it some space so that we can have more conversations as projects come through and we can include things in it. So a way to kind of symbolize that this is a document that is meant to give you a platform to discuss and kind of go through the different elements and cases that we've seen and areas that are being developed.
Totally. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, and one more note too.
Sure.
I will note that I do have a little note in there about Good Hope Road, about its change to Marionberry Avenue. The problem was that a lot of the projects that are in our blocks are still under Good Hope Road. And so if somebody was looking for a project, then it was actually a little harder to find. So for the cases, I kept it Good Hope Road, but I will try to make that more consistent for sure. But that's it.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Given the work that we talked about, or additional meeting we talked about you doing with Miss Fuller and possibly Miss Miller as well, how would you like us to proceed today, Amania? Would you, should we wait to take a vote until you're able to do that and then bring back a final with whatever comments were appropriate to include?
Monique, this is Steve. I'm going to jump in.
Yes.
I think we should
you.
wait. I think we're going to
Okay.
these are going to be a number of revisions, and you guys should have the opportunity to see all those.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so then,
Oh, Chair Heath, I just have one
yes,
question
go
about
ahead.
Amaya and Steve, and maybe you know too, but does OP have anything that has a glossary of terminology of like what is a setback, and do they have anything like that? I don't think I've ever looked on their website for it.
We do have
So,
something,
yeah,
yes.
they just put out, or I want to say Urban Design Team in OP just put out a guide for urban design language. So just breaks down all of those, and that's where I got that first map. I don't know if you guys have the actual plan up, but one of the first map images is from the visual guide, and it just talks about elements of urban design: density, street scale, height and massing, mixed use, all of the terminology to break it down. So that's kind of helpful for that information, not really from a preservation standpoint, but just from an urban design standpoint. It talks less about character and why that's important, more about, hey, if they're asking for a setback, that this is what it means.
Yeah.
So that's what their guide, but it's really comprehensive.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any value to referencing that document in this document, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? You can reference what those things are, because I thought, I think it was Ms. Miller's suggestion about having definition of what these things were, so people know what a setback is, or when we say stepping down, what does that mean proportionately, or even different planning terms, in terms of relationships of buildings to streets to people. Those kind of things might be helpful because you're using them in this, and it seems redundant for you to have to necessarily. There's some that you'll want to recreate in this document, but others that may be more helpful to people. They could just go online and click the link to where it is on the OP website.
Okay. Definitely, I will. I will include that information. I think what I'm hearing though is actually less I wouldn't even call it visual, but preservation jargon, and more simpler jargon, I guess, more layman jargon that really clarifies what those specific elements are asking for, and then kind of going into the preservation jargon so that it gets more in depth. So, okay.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Chair Heath.
Sure. Does anyone else have questions or final comments before we close on this for today, given that this is going to come back to us once it's further refined?
Madam Chair, I know we don't usually break in once we've spoken, but I ask you this time to hear me. I have a question.
Sure.
And thank you so much. It actually kind of came out, but I didn't say a lot about it. But the original historic Anacostia district versus the expansion. And we know that as we expanded out, that there were a lot of vacant properties, or maybe it didn't have some of the buildings may been in disarray or whatever. So we have taller buildings along Marionberry Avenue, I'm sorry, along the 1600 block. And then we have the Griswold edition. I'd really like the board and maybe the office and the Historic Preservation Office to give me and the community a sense. I'm not saying treat them differently, But really from Good Hope Road, Marionberry Avenue and Martin Luther King to Morris Road, we still have quite a bit of buildings that represent old historic Anacostia. How do we keep those and that history still alive without creating a new building like 1603 or 1605? Or that we still have that character. And I feel like we're losing that character. So in these guidelines, I want to make sure that we emphasize that area, not that I'm, putting the other part off, but I don't want to lose that because then we really lose Anacostia. And that's my comment. So I'd like to hear what the board thinks about it and what the office, the Historic Preservation Office thinks.
Okay. Does anyone want to weigh in now or?
Marnique, this is Steve. Why don't we meet with Greta and have this conversation with her?
That sounds good.
And we will come back to you. And if she feels that we haven't been responsive and we're not addressing the concern, we can further the conversation. But it's more of a conversation. I don't think it needs a response today.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds great. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Then if there are no further questions, we will close this hearing for today and look forward to having the further refined guidelines come back to us for approval. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work on this, Amania.
Problem. Thank you. Bye.
All right, and we can move on to our next case at 1017 M Street Northwest.
Good morning, Matt.
Right, go ahead, Brendan. Good morning.
Sure. Sorry. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. This is Brendan Meyer, Historic Preservation Specialist, the lead preservation reviewer for the Shaw Historic District for the Office of Planning. This case is for the property 917 M Street Northwest, which is a contributing property in the Shaw Historic District, case number 24-430. The agent, Jose Alfredo Solis, on behalf of owners Landaverde and Peralta, seeks review by the board to recertify the property as a non-contributing building due to integrity and structural issues that they are submitting, saying that the integrity is irretrievably lost due to severe deterioration. Recertifying 1017 M Street as a non-contributing building would allow for a future raise permit for the building to be approved by HPO staff without further referral to the board. 1017 M Street, as said before, is a contributing property in the Shaw Historic District. It was built in 1890 and exhibits several facets of late Victorian row house architecture. In particular, its massing, its projecting bays, its slate turret and mansard roofs. Its ornament is very evocative of the late Victorian period. Perhaps the only part that doesn't exhibit these Victorian features is the first floor, which is clad in a mid-20th century permastone cladding material. In addition to being a contributing property to the Shaw Historic District, the building also possesses a significant cultural history as a central place where events described in a groundbreaking sociology book. The name of the book is Talley's Corner, Study of Negro Street Corner Men, and that was published in 1967. This book was groundbreaking in the field of social work during the time of the civil rights movement in the 60s. It has gained quite a bit of fame in the field for how groundbreaking the method and subject matter was. The author, Elliot Liebau, was a PhD candidate from Catholic University, who had been hired to study and research Black families in poverty. Liebau found that the social work system at the time had a lot of information about women and children, but had almost no information about men. This condition was kind of twofold. Mothers and children without fathers were a typical client of social workers. That was the profile that they most encountered and a profile most in need. In addition to that, the social workers who were treating the mothers and children tended to stigmatize the fact that fathers were not in the picture and causing the need for the social work programs. Liebau didn't quite accept that accepted belief of the field. He thought that there was more to the story. So he set about to insert himself into the social networks of African-American men in DC. He did that by living with them day and night for a little over a year and writing down his observations and experiences in his book, Tally's Corner. The book was illuminating to the field. It gained national attention. It gained the attention and positive comments of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was very involved in the civil rights movement of the 60s. Liebau's book essentially humanized the African-American men that he lived with. He treated the men that he lived with respectfully. He gave them a presence. He turned them from ghosts into real things. He brought to light how these men were not, in fact, absent figures, but that they struggled against racism to find work, that they aspired to middle-class stability, but futilely because they are burdened with poor educations, and that these men, in response to that, actually built a fluid, dynamic, robust, broad family network of interchangeable and shared support roles amongst each other. A much broader sense of family than the typical nuclear family that the social workers at the time thought that they should have. Liebau showed that these men weren't absent, but they were real, present, simply overextended, but tirelessly trying to overcome unforgiving social forces. The only problem with the social welfare system at the time is that they just did not see these men who were right there the whole time. In the book, Liebau did not identify where Tally's Corner was. Tally was one of the one of the men in the social group that was the center of the social network. Tally's Corner, the name of the book comes from that person, which was a pseudonym. Liebau's book protected the identity of these men, and in doing that, the book itself never identifies where this street corner was in downtown Washington, D.C. It was only in later interviews that Liebau identified 11th and M Street as the location of Tally's Corner, and in particular that the liquor store at 1017 M Street, which is the subject property today, was an important hub for these men and their family network. 1017 M Street was last used as a laundromat. That laundromat has not been used for about 10 years. Until recently, the apartments of the second and third floor were occupied by renters. They have not been able to occupy the building since about 2015, when the building suffered substantial damage due to the construction of the new building on its east face, which in the drawings will appear on the right of of 1017 M Street. The damage that occurred during construction of the tall building required that the south wall of the row house be braced until it could be repaired, but the bracing remains in place today and the wall remains unrepaired. The current owners of 1017 are new, having acquired the property recently in December 2023. The applicants have submitted a structural engineers report from Ehlert Bryan DC, who are consulting structural engineers. This report outlines multiple structural deficiencies with the building. As mentioned previously, the east party wall, or sorry, where the front facade meets the east party wall against the high-rise building, the front facade is separated and is bulging loosely forward towards the sidewalk and is held in place by the bracing. The floor joists that tie into the east party wall have dislodged out of their joist pockets and sunk upwards of 6 inches beneath their original locations. This subsidence of the framing systems is enough in this location that there is daylight between the mansard roof and the party wall, where obviously there should be no daylight. The west wall along 11th Street exhibits similar symptoms of joist dislodgement, with the facade bulging outward towards that sidewalk as well. This is plainly evident from the grounds due to the bulging of the wall around the second floor windows between the corner projection and the other side projection to the north. Rot and dislodgement are endemic throughout the floor joists and roof rafter structural systems of the building. Accompanying the engineer's report is a drawing package from Bonsray Harrison Architects, which illustrates with photos the interior and exterior condition of the building. It includes drawings that show the areas that would require demolition and reconstruction in order to repair the building suitable for occupancy and reuse. In addition to the submitted materials, the HPO staff, I have been able to survey the interior of the building with a site visit. Notable from the site visit on the inside is, in particular, in my observation, a veritable forest of haphazardly installed columns and metal structural members in the basement, which were installed by the previous owner in order to support the first floor, which required the massive amount of reinforcement because the first floor was occupied by a massive live load, including the machinery for a laundromat, the water used in the washers of the equipment, and the vibrations generated by the machinery. This load and vibration in combination caused what staff believes was an incredible amount of stress on the first floor, leading to significant structural damage in that alone. The application, in the staff opinion, presents a strong argument that the building has lost its structural integrity due to the damages it has suffered and the lack of maintenance by the previous owners. While reconstruction of a small section of a historic building may be feasible as an option to preserve the building's integrity and preserve its contributing status, the damage at 1017 is sufficiently thorough and extensive enough that it's likely to require complete reconstruction. Whether demolition of the original structure and replacement with new structure is done at one time or in parts, the final result is the same, that in order to restore this building, you would essentially have to replace every part of the building, leading to its total loss of historic fabric. So the conclusion of the staff recommendation is that the total loss of historic fabric would result in loss of the building, and that reluctantly we recommend that the board recertify 1017 M Street Northwest as a non-contributing building to the historic district due to its irretrievable loss of integrity due to severe deterioration and damage. I remain available if the board has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Does the board have questions at this time?
Sure, just a quick one for you, Brendan. I know you said that there'll be a loss of material. But did you also, was it considered to brace the entire skin just build a new building inside of the skin of this building?
I think the applicant's testimony can address that more directly. It was staff's final conclusion in reviewing the engineer's report and the application materials that the displacement of the masonry facade where the south elevation meets the east party wall and the bulging of the west elevation along 11th Street indicated that if there is what connection remained between the masonry walls and the structure of the building was tenuous at best, and that trying to brace the brick facades while all of the structure behind them was removed and replaced would be a very difficult task, to say the least. But that sort of work also runs into the regulations, the historic preservation regulations, which define what types of work constitutes demolition of a building. And one of those parameters is when you take a contributing building and you substantially remove its load-bearing features. Its load-bearing masonry walls, its floor joists, and its roof rafters. And the regulations say that if you substantially remove those load-bearing features, you effectively demolish the building. And so the regulation is frankly is kind of a two-edged sword. That regulation allows the board to require owners of contributing buildings that only have sections of bad framing to say, okay, replace those sections of framing, but substantially retain the structure of the building. So that way the building can be retained as a contributing building. So that way it's not demolished. But to substantially remove the framing of the building as proposed in the applicant's application, to remove its joists and rafters and structure would meet the definition of demolition of the building. That makes the question of whether or not the best preservation approach is to embrace and support the facades alone while demolishing the structure of the building behind, whether that's the best course of action for preservation. That's difficult to say, but removing as much of the structure as the engineer's report says that they have to replace, have to remove, would meet the definition by itself of demolition of the building, according to the preservation regulations.
Thanks. Do you know also, Brendan, if there was any history of citations from the city about continued deterioration on this building?
The details on the building's recent history were mostly one of legal dispute between the owner of the corner building and the builders and condominium association of the new building that was constructed in 2015.
Okay. There
is the claim that by the corner building property owner that the new construction damaged his building, and they entered into legal negotiations of the condominium association in the new building, repairing that damage. It never reached litigation in court, but the negotiations did not reach a conclusion that led to any action. All that happened was an acknowledgement that damage was caused by the new construction. The wall was braced. That's the bracing that you could see in the photograph. There was an offer by the owners of the new building to repair the damage, but that offer was routinely declined by the owner of the corner building, leading to this ambiguous status. The damage to the building and the bracing, that was the time that the Department of Buildings ordered the residents to vacate the premises because it was unsafe. But the owner of the corner building took no action to fix it himself or let the adjacent property fix it as offered. Instead, the owner sold the property.
Or waited several years and then sold it.
Yes.
My last question is, we've been talking a lot about above grade, but I'm assuming the foundations for this adjacent building go far deeper than this house. Do you know if there was any assessment of the foundations or footings of this building as well?
I believe that question will be addressed in the applicant's presentation. The structural report and the architectural drawings do make reference to the relationship of the footers of the old building and the new building.
Thank you, Brendan.
You're welcome.
Right. So then with that, let's hear the applicant's presentation, and then we can come back to the board for additional questions.
Hi, this is Jack Waterman from Bonsor Harrisline Architects. We've been working with Jose Alfredo Solis and his family members that purchased the property in December 2023. And they intended to do minor repairs on the property before they realized the extent of the structural damage. Bill McLean of Eller Bryant is the structural engineer that we're working with. And over a number of site visits, we found significant settlement up to 6 inches on that east party wall. Rotting structural members, failing lintels above many of the windows, especially on the west side, and a number of non-historic alterations. The south facade, as we mentioned, is leaning out about 4 inches and has been braced with wooden braces for years. The ANC has been pushing to get this building fixed for a number of years and has sent a letter of support. And we believe that because of the extent of the replacement work required to rehabilitate this building, we've come to apply to reclassify it as non-contributing to the historic district for loss of structural integrity. And I think on the next slide, Bill McLean will go over more details.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So my name is Bill McLean. I'm a principal at Eller Bryant. I've been a practicing structural engineer here in the district for over 22 years now. And so we didn't have any previous history with this building, but we're called in, I think May of this year was the first we went to the site to perform an initial structural survey. Really, as Jack mentioned, it was in the premise of, can we just, fix the building for the new owner, and kind of immediately realized we were getting into something a little more severe than that. And so ultimately performed a very thorough structural survey, including looking at the building plans from that adjacent high-rise condominium building, which wraps not only the east side, but also the north side. So it totally encompasses the corner property. And there was a question just recently, it does have a lower basement, and they underpinned the 2 sides of our foundation walls at the time of that construction about 10 years ago. So I don't think I can do a better job than Brendan did of articulating and speaking that well, but I will give my high-level executive summary of all those words on the screen that you probably can't read in our report. And that is that structure as it stands today, and there's a lot of reasons we heard about how it's gotten to that point of neglect and damage from construction, continued water getting in. But as it stands today, it is a severely high risk to the public, in my opinion. And that is that south wall in particular, where that wood bracing was. Maybe if whoever is in control could flip to the next slide, might be better. Let's go one further than that. yeah, here's a floor plan. So in this case, south is to the left of the screen. And so the neighboring building is the gray area to the bottom and to the right. So that southeast corner, the bottom left of the screen is the most severe movement area. But the whole structure has issues that are progressively related, but that south wall in particular has leaned outward, and it's a 12 and stepping down 8-inch solid brick wall, has leaned 4 inches at the top floor away. The only thing holding it is that wood bracing, and that wood bracing is not even heavy timber. It's 2x members that were put in very temporarily, I think in about 2015, right at the time or shortly after that construction of the adjacent building. It is, was not meant to be exposed to the elements. The bracing is rotting, the nails are failing, and it's the only thing holding gravity up against that wall. So we, either Mother Nature will bring it down, or hopefully not. We will, safely raise the building. In addition to that south wall, the next most severe kind of ongoing, actually, we've monitored movement of continued structural displacement is the party wall, which is on the bottom of the screen. And that's the one that had been underpinned. There's also evidence that that neighboring contractor had done some temporary bracing of that wall. There's a few steel plates and some tie rods. I mean, it obviously was a problem during construction, and they were trying to kind of hold it together. It has settled 6 inches, and I'll show you later in the photos how we measured, but it's very clear that that wall has gone down. It's taken all the floor joists and the roof joists with us. So not only is it a risk to the public on the sidewalk right there, that whole corner is, probably months, if not weeks away from coming down on its own with, the right heavy windstorm, rain is pouring in, we get into the winter months and ice freezing and moving things. It's a danger to anyone entering the building, and really no one should be going in there, including our design team at this point. Let's go down to the next slide. I'll just give you a few more specific sort of examples. So this is a good section cut, one east-west, one north-south. So on the photo, or the section on the left, you can see highlighted in pink, that is that wall along M Street and how it is leaning outward, and, like, as I said, up to 4 inches at the top. And as Brendan mentioned, totally disconnected from the corner wall. You can stick your hand through to the outside, and rain is just continuing to come in and continually rot, and I think cause the undermining of the foundation too, with the moisture just coming down. And on the right-hand section, that's the view of that, what was the party wall. There's now a complete expansion joint. There's no connection of the new building that was built. It's what was a one-time a party wall is now just the bearing wall for our property. And that is the one that has settled 6 inches, and all of the floors have displaced with it and pulled out of their joist pockets. And likely it caused what is, progressively the damage as you go around that corner turret, all the brick arches over those windows. On the inside, bricks are literally falling into the floor of what was the bedroom. Headers over the windows have step cracks. Brick piers have shear cracks on the upper 2 floors, particularly on that west side along 11th Street. Next slide, please. So this is just in red, kind of highlighting the obvious areas of damage on the 2 elevations that face the street. We've talked through those, and a lot more is visible from the inside of those walls than some of the cladding and paint and ivy has a little bit hidden from the street side view, but it's very, very obvious on the inside where all the finishes have fallen off, actually. So everything is exposed to view. Let's go to the next slide. Similarly, more photos, they're a little hard to see in this view. Maybe the upper right is worth noting. So that is up close at the M Street side where the party wall meets the neighbor's taller building. The bricks there have, separated. They're in the picture, they're leaning towards us as you go up, and there's a gap that's pulled apart, ripped the caulking that was installed at the time of 2014 construction. Next slide, please. So here are a few inside pictures, years of moisture and humidity and disrepair. All the ceilings, of course, have fallen down. Floor joists are moldy, rotted. In many places, especially that first floor, because of the heavy washing machine loads, are cracked and completely gone. All the wood framing is really gone. Next slide. Right, so this is just kind of how we were able to pretty clearly see the amount of movement. So let's see, on the upper left, that's where we're standing in the third floor bedroom, southeast corner, and just looking at the sunshine in the sky through a few inches between the corner wall. In the bottom two pictures that have a tape measure, the photo on the left, that is looking straight down at the floor. You can see shoe molding in the place where the wall used to be, and 4 inches out is where the wall is now. That's that south wall. The photo on the bottom right, that's a vertical tape measure looking at the party wall. And again, the floor has gone down 6 inches from where the drywall is still in the original place, kind of hanging from the roof. Next photo. Next slide. And then lastly here, this is the basement. You can see in the upper left, that series of what probably was steel or iron framing put in some years ago for helping to reinforce the laundromat, and then the more bright red pipe columns were more of a temporary measure, I think, put in the 2014 timeframe just to stabilize things. The photo I really wanted to point out, because it's where we've seen movement, is the one in the upper middle. So that's a partition 2x4 wood stud wall that was put in the basement some years ago, obviously with straight studs, and with the downward settlement of the building has crushed those studs and they're bending sideways. And just in the period of a couple months that we were in the building, those continued to bend further, which indicated more settlement and ongoing settlement. So that really concerns us. And it's not stabilized, it's continuing to move and get worse as more elements come in. So I believe that brings me to the end of what I wanted to share, but certainly happy to address questions if there are any, or if Jack, you wanted to.
Yeah, if you go back one slide, we haven't discussed much about the lintels above the windows along the west side, but the photo on the top right is a pretty good example, or the one in the center at the top. From the outside it looks like stone, but on the inside it's metal spanning those, and it totally rusted and failed. And between that, maybe in combination with the rest of the structure, dislodging, they're bulging out. And my understanding is that after a certain amount of bulging, you couldn't just repoint the brick. You'd have to kind of take it all apart, replace the steel. And that's part of why we indicated the areas around those windows as part of the demolition. In that image, maybe if we go back to 4 slides or so to the image that shows the red all over the facade of the building, that's where we're talking about 75%, 80% of the facade that would need to be demolished, replaced in order to rehabilitate the building.
Right, there was a question about, did we look at, or could it be considered to sort of brace the exterior walls, and rebuild the interior framing. And initially we certainly were considering and thinking along those lines, but that would need the exterior walls to basically be stable. And then you could feasibly do that. They're not. Obviously, 3 of the 4 walls are effectively needing to be rebuilt. The east wall is settling, which is a whole different issue. So that's foundation work. So we'd have to stabilize, underpin, reinforce footings first, and then really rebuild all of the portions of brick because they're moved, they're cracked, they're displaced. So you physically have to take it apart, rebuild it, and brace the walls, and then put it. So you're that's why I say I think it was unfeasible. There's no reasonable way anybody could afford to do that, you know, at that point, just because you have to completely essentially rebuild the bearing walls of the exterior and the foundations before you can even replace the interior framing.
I'm not, I'm sorry. I'll wait till you're done. I have several questions.
So that's all I was going to offer.
Could you
Go
talk
ahead.
a little bit? Oh, sorry, Chair.
Nope,
I'll
go
wait.
ahead. Go ahead.
Only because I'm not so familiar with your company, Mr. McLean. Could you talk a little bit? I noticed on your website you do some examination of larger scale, newer construction masonry buildings, but could you talk a little bit about your personal experience with forensic structural work like this on buildings of this era?
Sure.
Familiarity with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I've been practicing here in the district for over 20 years. So many of our projects of sort of new construction or redevelopment have involved, these types of turn of the century row homes, brick bearing masonry walls, interior wood framing. And so from a renovation standpoint, we've had many examples of experience of either just converting, renovating, say, that building, or becoming part of a larger development and either retaining facades or retaining the structure itself, strengthening, improving, maybe converting. So kind of worked in and around these, to a high comfort level that I will just say plainly, this is the worst I've ever seen and gone into, and it frankly scared me when I was walking through it, which is saying a lot because we've seen, every kind of good, bad, and in between structure. So, and then, yeah, similarly, someone from forensics often we're hired to do, due diligence or sort of a survey, but either maybe a potential owner of a building or they have an issue and they're worried about it. So we have wide experience, surveying, writing those reports, and giving reasonable recommendations. And that's kind of how we were called into this one.
And then thank you. Did you have the larger buildings documentation for any kind of underpinning they either did or were have to have done?
Yes, we were able to get all of the plans, including structural drawings for the neighbors' buildings. So what we don't have are the shop drawings because the delegated designs. We don't have the specific what they underpin, but we have the design intent from the structural engineers of the larger building. So we can see the idea of how deep they went, what they were proposing, continuous concrete underpinning, which is, should all be fine. It's normal practice.
Right.
So it's still surprising that there must be something going on with the soils down there. And like I said, I think it's probably largely the stream of water that has been allowed to come in that wreaks havoc on any soil bearing. And so I think it's been undermining that underpinning over the years.
And then could you clarify why you think the facades, and maybe it'd be helpful to look at them or talk about them separately here. Let me zoom out of this here. I guess north is to the right in that plan view, but maybe it'd be helpful to talk. I understand why the east facade against the 1011 condos would need to be rebuilt, but I'm not clear on why the west facade or the south facade might need to be, and particularly the west facade might need to be completely rebuilt. I see the jack rusting at the lintels, which is pretty substantial. That'd be a nice photo for a textbook sometime of what is jack rusting. But could you talk about why, in particular, the entire west facade would need to be rebuilt? Or is it substantial amounts of repair?
Yeah, the entire west facade would not need to be rebuilt. And the image we're looking at here, the photo on the right, is that 11th Street facade. And essentially all those red areas would need 100% rebuilt. They're totally dilapidated bricks, the mortar's gone. And so that is like the extent of what would absolutely have to be rebuilt. It's more a matter then of how would one reasonably brace this sort of partial wall, you know, with no structure? So it just then goes beyond the, okay, if the south wall's 99% needing to be replaced and this west wall is, you know, say 50% or so, there's just not much structure left there to work with. But yeah, the base, well, the one caveat I'll put is the first floor. We can't quite tell the condition because it's got that false stone on it. We can see from the inside, but it progressively got worse as you go up. The third floor was the worst. Second floor was kind of in between, and first floor was not as bad.
It could be said that the first floor also has a many non-historic alterations to it. That,
Yeah. And the framing for the floor systems that are inside the building, are they pocketed into the I guess, how many widths of brick are these exterior walls? Is it 2, 3,
I
or
think
4?
they start out as 3 for the basement on the first floor.
Go
and
up
they
to 2?
Step down to 2 for the
Okay.
upper 2
And
floors.
are the beams pocketed into the walls, or do they sit on some kind of a shelf or
Yeah,
combination of the two?
the joists are all pocketed at
Okay.
every level.
And I didn't look at the age of this, but is it pocketed just masonry, or is it pocketed sitting on any kind of metal plate or anything like that?
It's just masonry. I think they have some tar paper. There was something that was attempted to, you know, waterproof the end of the joist.
Okay.
Could I ask a quick question on this photo? These two photos, they don't seem to match up in terms of the conditions that are shown. I guess, can you clarify which one is current and which one is not?
the one on the right is from Google Street View, and the one on the left is a little bit newer.
Okay, thank you.
After the ivy was removed, but even that, so it's degraded since then. So
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I had a question. Mr. Waterman, you mentioned support from the ANC. I don't think we got that in our packet. Could you clarify the status?
Oh, they worked with us. We went to their meeting. They worked with us afterward to make sure the letter got sent in. So we can make sure that you get that following. But yeah, we
So they
presented
wanted
to their
support?
a letter of support. We presented to their committee and the full ANC. They voted in favor.
Okay.
Madam Chair, this is Brendan Meyer from the Office of Planning. I can confirm that we received a letter of support from the ANC. It's a little unsure. I'm a little unsure why it wasn't in your packet.
Okay.
September 4th, duly called and properly noticed public meeting with a quorum. President acting throughout. ANC 2F voted unanimously 6-0 to support the applicant's request to designate the building as a non-contributing building to the historic character in the neighborhood due to loss of structural integrity.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brendan, for that.
Thanks.
And thanks for asking about that, Bill. I was going to do the same. Did you have other questions, Bill?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. I believe Rebecca Miller would like to testify on this application.
Good
Is
morning.
she still on the line? Yep.
I
Oh,
am.
you are.
I am.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, you don't hear from me for months, and here I am, like at every.
Right. Good morning.
Good morning. So thank you very much. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm the director of the DC Preservation League. So we're not going to dispute the severe deterioration in integrity of this building. But one thing I'd like to point out to the board is that there's a number of examples around the city of facades that are braced. It's my understanding that the former owner rejected the condo's offer to fix the building. The damage that they assert was from that. I mean, we have facades on New Jersey Avenue that are on church property. The Atlantic building at one point was also just hanging by supports. And one of the biggest threats to potential landmarks that are associated with African American history and culture in the District of Columbia is demolition by neglect and/or demolition. We have been working very hard over the last decade to diversify the DC inventory, to make sure that underrepresented communities, such as the African American community, is fully documented in the DC inventory, and this particular building is on our list of potential landmarks because of its association with Tally's Corner and the significance in the social Black history of this particular site. We've seen other buildings come before the board that were not designated and they're lost now. And this, as I mentioned, is the biggest threat to landmarks in the district, or potential landmarks in the district that are associated with African American history and culture, because of this continued bit. Even if you go on Google Street View, you can see the progression of this building from 1 support to 2 supports to 3 supports. And you're going to hear later in other cases where you have buildings that have lost their integrity due to demolition by neglect, not necessarily by the owner, sometimes by the District of Columbia government. But I'd like for you all to think about how important this building is to the city and the history of African American communities that is associated with the social history of the city before you make the determination that this is no longer a contributing building. And that's really all we have to say at this point. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Miller?
I have a general question. I'm not sure who would be able to answer it, but do we have any indication of what the owners might want to do with this property after recategorizing it? If it's demolished, what might go in its place? Obviously we've heard a lot about the significance of the history, and Shaw is a rapidly changing environment with a lot of significance to the Black community here in DC. But also I'm looking at the prominence of this building on the street corner and the corner that it's on specifically. So I'm just curious if there's been any indication to what the property owner's plans are if we were to redesignate this property.
At this time, we're not proposing any replacement building, but we have spoken to the neighbors about the limits of this site. If you were to build a building, it couldn't be much larger than this because you'd only have space for 1 stair, not space for an elevator. It would likely be commercial on the ground and have probably 2 units above. So it'd be really similar. And it could take influence from the footprint of this building or some of the architectural features. The owner, well, the representative, the member of the family that owns this building, owns the restaurant across the street and may have intended to use it for a related commercial purpose. But it's too early to say. That this site is, I think, much smaller than the site across the street, so it might not be the ideal use. At this point, unfortunately, they've realized they are kind of in a tax issue where until this goes through, that they were paying the vacancy rates, and so we're trying to assist with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions? All right. Then we don't have anyone else registered to speak on this application, so if there are no other questions, I'll ask board members to turn on your cameras and we can deliberate.
Sure. Heath, do you know if we through deliberation decide to deny this and it still is retained as a contributing, maybe this is a question of Steve too. Is this something that would go to the mayor's agent?
The applicants would have the opportunity to pursue it through the mayor's agent. Yes.
Okay.
To pursue the demolition through the mayor's agent, or would they have to do that through proposing a project?
No, it sort of depends on what grounds they would seek. The board, they're asking you all to find demolition to be consistent with the act, because the building has lost integrity. They could make that same argument to the mayor's agent, or they could conversely make an economic hardship argument, or they could make a special merit argument, and that would require a replacement project.
Got it. Okay. All right. Would anyone like to start?
I don't know if I'd like to, but I will.
Yeah, like to was probably not the right choice of words.
I'd like to thank the applicants and their engineer for the information that they have provided, and thank Brendan for risking his life to go into this building. I think, to me, this is it's unfortunate there's this confluence of issues that happened related to both to the construction of this building, impacted this building that was already, seems like it was already fragile and poorly maintained as well, because some of these things that we see in the photographs are not things that happen overnight. And so there's a combination of things that have happened that whoever owns this building now is sort of inheriting, but I am not yet convinced that the maintenance of the exterior facade, which is important for a contributing building, is the exterior appearance of this. While I understand our code requirements about substantial demolition and the interior demolition, I agree with what Brendan has said. We would be allowing for significant interior, complete interior demolition. It would be a sort of a facadectomy to maintain the exterior facade, but we would be asking for the floor levels to be recreated. I'm not convinced that the facade couldn't be, significantly stabilized and then repaired and reconstructed to maintain the integrity of the exterior envelope of this building. So I currently am not in support of this becoming a non-contributing building, which is why I asked about the mayor's agent, because there could be some larger issues at impact here that could be considered, and the mayor's agent could also ask for other mitigating solutions like documentation or representation of the significant African American history that has happened at this site and its relationship to the District of Columbia, which we are not in a position currently to do as a part of this. So that's why I asked the question about the mayor's agent.
So, question, is part of what you're saying then that if it goes to the mayor's agent, even if it is demolished eventually, the mayor's agent can condition it so that there are aspects of commemoration or other things that might be part of it, which we can't ask for if we say it's not contributing.
Right.
That's an interesting position, which is that if we say, okay, it's not contributing, then none of the aforementioned, sort of history of this is guaranteed to be part of any kind of ongoing commemoration of what happened here and how important this was, as Ms. Miller has pointed out and others. It's an interesting position, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm concerned about with the loss of this is such a rich story and history. So I like where you're going with this, Gretchen.
And I haven't, certainly I'm not the professional. None of us are the professionals working on this, right? So I haven't been in this building to know, and I think I would be afraid to go in this building myself, but I understand that the party wall between the new building and this building, likely from the photographs, appears to clearly need to be rebuilt, right? But that is not a significant wall or feature, right? Because it's a party wall that's meant to be a party to another building. But the west elevation that we're looking at on 11th Street appears to me to, while requiring significant interventions, could largely be stabilized and maintained. And then it's this piece on the south facade that's immediately adjacent that I'm questioning about the amount of reconstruction that really would need to be done. And the turret repair to me seems to be around the windows primarily. And I don't know enough about the details of the framing and the masonry construction. And if this is 2 whites of brick, then, there are different details that would follow from that. So I'm not in a position to, provide for forensic recommendations for these, but I'm not convinced that. And I think we heard testimony that the facades wouldn't need to be completely disassembled, except for this portion on the south facade that's immediately adjacent to the new building that may need significant, removals and then repair in order to work. But I don't think that to me, that this amount of repair, given the history of the building, even on the west facade, this amount of repair for a building that has essentially been living through demolition by neglect for a long period of time, and then was exacerbated by this new building being built to it. I don't think that compromises the integrity of the west facade, because in large part those materials could be, remaining and put back in their place. Yeah, still lintels need to be replaced if with the jacking that we saw in those photographs. That is some pretty incredible rust jacking. That's like the kind of stuff you read about in textbooks.
But it is also true that the mayor's agent could also decide that the building is beyond repair too, but put mitigation things on them, right? Yeah. Which I can understand. I mean, I think the challenges of saving this are enormous. It's a small building. It's it's got some very, very serious challenges. If it didn't have the history that it had, would we see it differently, or would you, Gretchen, keep your same argument?
Well, I think to me, it sounds like this building is not only it is currently a contributing building, but it has some eligibility as a landmark as well because of the history, right? And that is what to me raises the level of significance and need for retention if possible.
Yeah, I think that matters, Matt.
Yeah, answer your question in one word. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that matters. Does anyone else have thoughts they want to share on this?
Madam Chair, this is Brendan Meyer. Just in response to Mr. Bell's comment about how the mayor's agent operates. Typically, the mayor's agent will not substitute his expertise, his architectural and structural expertise. He won't substitute that for that of the board's. The mayor's agent relies on the board to be the architectural and structural experts. The mayor's agent, if they were to receive an application to raise this building as a contributing building, as Steve mentioned before, the mayor's agent is limited to reviewing the case under a set of particular claims. One in particular being economic hardship. If a claim of economic hardship were made, perhaps the application would go into detail about how much it would cost to restore the building, compare that to the financial resources of the owner, and the owner would be making that claim. So the mayor's agent would be reviewing the case based on the claim presented by the applicant. But none of those claims squarely relate to or call for the mayor's agent to substitute his structural conclusions over that of the board.
So could I ask a question, maybe for Gretchen? I guess was the implication being that as a condition of potential future mayor's agent approval be some sort of interpretation or something that's on the site to commemorate this history? Oops, I think you're muted, Gretchen.
Thanks. I guess we could let the mayor's agents know that that's something that, should they decide for other reasons, financial hardship or other reasons that are available to the mayor's agent, that this building would need to be demolished or would come back as recommended to be demolished, and it would probably come back to us again. with that recommendation, then he could ask us to make recommendations about those kind of solutions, or he could make those recommendations, I would guess. I don't know, Steve might have some more input on something like that, but that's something that could happen as a part of either their consideration as having a larger purview about planning and development in the district, and could come back asking us to make recommendations on it as well.
Yeah, just to chime in, I would focus your review, and I think you have, on why you feel that the significance of this building warrants an approach that includes maybe some partial reconstruction, and that doesn't lead you to the decision to allow it for it to be completely demolished. That the significance is a factor in your decision, and sort of not worry about the mayor's agent process. I mean, all of this will be part of the mayor's agent record, but I think the conversation you were having just a minute ago about how the extraordinary social significance and cultural significance of this building is a factor in your decision to retain this as a contributing building to the historic district, albeit one that may require some substantial reconstruction.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, complete interior reconstruction. I am convinced of that from the photographs that I saw, and from kind of peeking around and in as much as I could, and being at the site. But I think in large parts, especially the west facade, I think there could be some significant interventions, but I don't know that I think it needs to be disassembled. But again, I haven't looked at it as, the preservation professional. I haven't looked at it for that reason. And the turret as well.
Ms. Heath?
See where those repairs need to happen.
Ms. Heath, this is Bill Bonstra. May I speak?
You're not supposed to during deliberation.
I see.
Yeah, at this point, we're not supposed to. Did you have something that was relevant to this part of the argument that we're discussing about the significance?
But the significance of the building?
Right.
The
Or did you
social
have a
significance
question?
of the building? I do not.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
We presented the expertise of a structural engineer who
Mhm.
is accomplished in their field, beyond what I could ever do as an architect, beyond what I think many on the board and otherwise have the expertise to determine. This building will fall down, and this building, while these photos may look like the building is in great shape, I think Mr. McLean has demonstrated that the foundations below this building are faulty, and there might be subsurface conditions that will contribute to the building falling down that cannot be handled without Mr. Hercules himself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Mhm. Okay.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make a couple comments about the historical significance of this site in the context of itself in this property, but also in the context of what Ms. Miller discussed earlier, which was the ongoing threat of demolition by neglect to similar properties. It seems like, especially after hearing the previous case prior to our break, that the threat of demolition by neglect is certainly missing a sort of intermediary process before you get to that step of demolition. With this property, I'm not sure if it's possible to have time to further deliberate or make this determination, but I would like some time, along with the Historic Preservation Office, to review case studies of extreme rehabilitation and similar structures of similar time periods, because I think that while I appreciate, and I'm not an architect, I'm an archaeologist, and so I, defer to the architects here to speak to the structural integrity of this site, and certainly the risks that it poses to the public. But if there is any time available to look into creative solutions for even saying demolition with the caveats of what sort of structural features, facade features, material features can be restored during the reconstruction process. I'm just looking into what our role is as the board to protect this history and these properties, and if there's any intervention that we can advocate for prior to just saying outright demolition.
Sure, and that was what I think we were trying to explore with the initial thoughts that Gretchen put out there to, it's not to say that in the end this building won't be demolished, but there's another process that could happen that seems that would be the path for some sort of commemoration rather than taking the path of deeming this structure no longer contributing. And that, as we're understanding right now, doesn't give us the opportunity to have some sort of commemoration as a part of that decision. So it sounds like we're all on the same, but at least those who have spoken up are on the same page with exploring a path that would allow for that.
That's the only thing that I find troubling. We've seen buildings that have had very difficult situations on their interior, but sounds to me like the foundation here has largely been compromised. That's a serious problem. Makes any kind of rehabilitation of this very, very difficult.
Not insurmountable. Expensive, difficult, technically difficult, but not insurmountable.
No, I mean,
But then, Mark, to your point, are we saying then that we need to understand those numbers to then better inform our decision?
No, Petra, because financial hardship is not our consideration. Our consideration.
Okay, understood.
That goes
So-
to the mayor's agent. That would be a case they would need to make the mayor's agent.
So that's not something that we would use as a criteria to deliberate.
No, what's before us right now is whether we are willing to accept the request to determine or to consider this property no longer significant. So if it's no longer contributing, that's a better, proper terminology. If it's no longer contributing, then it no longer comes under the purview of historic preservation, and it can be demolished outright.
Sure.
If we deny the request, the applicant can still go to the mayor's agent and pose an argument, one of the three that Steve and Brendan outlined, as a path that could result in demolition, certainly, but gives a little bit more leeway for special merit or potentially commemoration or something that doesn't just erase this property in the history forever.
Yeah, just from my perspective, I actually do in alignment and concur with what previous board members have mentioned in regards to just the application itself. When I read the materials, I must say I was actually quite conflicted between after reading the staff report and then taking a look at the photographs, but also with the knowledge that notwithstanding the level of damage. This building was occupied less than 10 years ago. So, folks were in it. It was being used. So to put us to a position now where we're saying it's no longer contributing after less than 10 years of it being actually used, kind of hard. So yeah, I think there's more to look at before coming to, I guess, to a determination that it's not contributing.
Madam Chair, can I make one more statement?
Sure.
So I just have one more concern about precedents with this case and the case that we actually reviewed prior to our break, which was in a building that was in much, much worse shape and had deep, deep, deep significance to the community. I believe a statement was made around, well, if you own a property in the historic district, you take on that responsibility as an owner, and you should do everything you can, regardless of the cost, to fix it or sell it to someone that has the money to do it. And I don't necessarily agree with that statement, but I think that there was a push there to say, at all costs, at all methods available, we should seek a way to prioritize restoring a space prior to demolition. And I think that we should certainly review all case studies and all options because I think that there is certainly more integrity to this site than there was in previous ones that were delisted as eligible. But I have concerns about the broader phenomenon that I see more and more in the city of demolition by neglect and sort of a waiting game of it's just a matter of time before a building can be delisted and then you can sort of do whatever you want because it's not a contributing property anymore. And so I want to, with whatever decisions we make and go forward on, that we make it clear to the public, to developers that prior to moving to any determination of eligibility, and as far as delisting goes, that every move possible is made to try to restore its status, maintain its status as an eligible property.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have comments? All right. Would anyone like to make a motion? If not, I'll start one and see if anyone wants to add to it. So I will say on the grounds of trying to find a path that allows for commemoration of the history of this site and for the history of the site to not be lost here. I am recommending denial of the application and ask that if this does add this, just in the event this does go to the mayor's agent, that the mayor's agent take into consideration the comments and concerns of the board today around making sure that something of the cultural and social significance of this site is preserved.
I'll second that because it could be materially done or otherwise, right?
Right. Yeah, it doesn't have to be the physical structure,
but it could be.
Yeah. But certainly could be if that's possible.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion?
If I could just make a small clarification, I guess the social architectural history of this building, as reflected in the staff report and the research that Brendan did to contribute to that, 'cause as I understand it, that's not reflected in the historic district nomination as it stands. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Then all those in favor say aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? Okay. Then, and any abstentions? All right, then the motion stands. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtfulness and participation in this today. We'll move to our next application, which is in Shaw Historic District at 1424 10th Street Northwest.
Hello, Madam Chair. This is Brendan Meyer, Historic Preservation Office. I am also the staff reviewer for the next case. The next case is at the address 1424 10th Street Northwest, a contributing building in the Shaw Historic District. The board last heard this application at its July meeting, and at the July meeting, the staff presented two questions that needed the board's attention. The board addressed the first one and gave clear advice on the first one. The second when the hearing reached the question of the second item brought up by the staff, the chair asked about ANC input, and the applicant saying that the ANC had not submitted anything yet. The chair suspended the record on this hearing so that way the applicant can bring it to the ANC and bring a recommendation from the ANC, which has happened. So the case returns to the board. The first item that the board addressed that should be considered concluded was how the open gap on the left of the front facade was going to be infilled. The applicant proposed a highly mirrored contemporary material that the board found incompatible with the historic district and advised the applicant to revise that to a more traditional cladding material for the infill that would be set back slightly. The applicant revised that material to a black brick, which staff recommends meets the board's advice and is very successful at preserving the proportions of the front facade and making it clear that the front facade wasn't originally attached. So the black brick really succeeds in maintaining the idea of a gap at the front facade. So staff recommends that the applicant is replying positively to the board's comment on that. The second issue that remains to receive the attention of the board is at the rear. What's proposed is an infill dogleg court on the north side with a structure that is contemporary, fairly prominent in terms of its form and its roof form. It's not visible from any primary street. It will have some presence in the alley, but just because of its very contemporary form and its size and its projection, staff requested the input of the board just on this matter in particular. The ANC recommendation that's been forwarded to the board was support of the application. So the ANC did not have any comment or objection to the applicant to the concept design presented to the board. So staff looks forward to the board's decision and deliberation on the rear alterations of the building. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brendan. Does the applicant want to present
Yes,
the
I'm
changes
here.
you've made? You can focus on the revisions.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so in the front, we had originally suggested a mirror-like material, and we changed it to brick as the board suggested. I think the idea here is that we go with a different color brick so that it really differentiates from the color of the existing structure in the front. And then in the rear, and does anybody have any questions about this? Okay, in the
You
rear,
should keep presenting. We'll take questions after you're
Yeah.
finished.
So if you can go to the rear, thank you. So I actually had looked at also doing a brick for this new wall extension, but for installment and having to go through the neighbor's property to install the brick, it just seemed, and also because of the architecture that we're doing in the back, it just seemed easier to install the metal panels. It also is a different look that really differentiates from the existing architecture. We pushed, so the conditioned space actually ends at the existing rear facade, but we pushed that wall 5 feet out so that there's a separation between the neighboring property and all of the openings that we're proposing there. And then that dogleg is also extended an additional 5 feet above the existing roof so that we can bring natural light into that space. Because we're not going to be allowed to do skylights right on that adjacent to the property. So that is the reason for doing this.
All right. Does that conclude your presentation?
Yeah, those are the two different changes that we've made.
Okay. Any questions
Thank you.
from the board?
Yeah, I have a question. So the new brick on the front facade, that's black brick, right? Not painted black.
We haven't decided yet. I think we're just going to do it with a black brick so that we don't have to paint it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from board members? Okay.
Yeah, I
Then
have one question
go
here.
ahead, Matt. Mhm.
So this image we're looking at on the right here with this piece that stands up here, which I think the staff report makes some reference to. What is that wall doing for you? It's a solid 3-story high wall, right?
2.5, yeah.
Wing. Well, it's 3 actually, isn't it? 3? Looks like 3 to me.
No, it doesn't extend to full 3rd floor. No.
Close enough. All right. So what does it do for you?
So so we wanted to add a lot of openings in that that infill, and by pushing that wall farther 5 feet, we create a 5-foot barrier between all the glass and the neighboring property, just for some safety.
What do you mean safety? Is there a
I mean, just
safety issue here you're solving for?
no, it's just in case of fire and all of that, we wanted the glass to be not so close to the property next door.
Right. Okay. You mean the glass, the 3-story tall glass pieces
Yes.
there that you can see on the right. Okay.
Yep.
And then there's a roof covering over this 3-story space, right?
On the dogleg addition, yes.
Yeah.
Actually,
What does that do for you?
if we can move, I'll answer that question. Can we go back to the axon drawing? Actually, that works. We wanted to really bring in natural light into this space, and code does not allow us to do light wells right next to the property.
Yeah.
So by pushing this, the roof of this addition up, we can add windows on the north side to bring in natural light. And when you're up there on the roof, you're actually looking down at the neighbor's apartment. So it does create some sort of privacy between the rooftop and the neighboring property.
Okay. Okay.
That's why you've extended it out
Yeah,
beyond
that's
the
why we
face of the
also
rear.
we extended that little wall right there because you would be looking right into people's either kitchen or bathrooms.
Right. But if the wall ended at the windows or maybe projected 6 inches beyond your windows, it would still give privacy, right? You can't stick out your head like that and look around that, right?
Well, are you talking about the one that extends beyond the rear wall?
It seems like a conceit that that, to be honest, I don't know. It seems like a conceit that sort of doesn't really create any. I mean, you could solve the privacy issues in other ways without this 3-story tall wall on your neighbor's on your property line that has no openings in it.
Oh, are you talking? Okay, so that wall that extends beyond the rear wall was for the 5-foot separation between any opening and at the property line. And I think that's per code. The wall that extends on the rooftop going towards the front, that was for privacy.
So this solid wall that extends 3 stories, the dark color, that's a code issue?
I'm pretty sure we need to provide a 5-foot separation between, if you're gonna have any openings.
So
you
the
need a
distance
5-foot
between the
separation.
windows that you're introducing in that slot and the edge of that wall is 5 feet or more.
Correct, 5 feet.
And that's required to have windows in that location?
It's not required, but we wanted to bring in more natural light instead of having just a solid wall.
But we're kind of talking past each other here. Well, I'm just not understanding why you have a 3-story tall solid wall there in that rear yard with the little roof over it. I don't know what problem that's solving. You know, the neighbors are now going to be looking out at this very, very tall. Is it clad in metal, I suppose? Is it metal
Yeah.
clad? Yeah.
That 5-foot wall that extends beyond provides a 5-foot horizontal separation between our openings that we're introducing and the property next door. That is why that wall is there. And it would have to be solid because otherwise there's no point of it.
Okay.
I guess I'm confusing myself. I'm sorry. So any opening requires 5 feet of wall beyond it to separate it from neighboring.
If you want to do it, yes, I can look up the code, but yes.
So, and please, maybe an architect member of the board can shut me up if it's not appropriate, but how would this not apply to windows on the front of the building? If that's.
Well, those windows are existing, and there is a 5-foot separation between our windows and the windows of the neighbors next door. In fact, we had thought about, doing windows in that front wall that we're introducing, but there is no 5-foot separation, so we decided to just make that wall solid as well.
Okay, yeah, maybe it's just a scale issue with how I'm viewing these two renderings.
Well, it has to do with putting windows on property lines, I think, is what you're saying. If
Correct.
there's a window on a property line. But so the length of that wall going into the rear yard has to be minimally 5 feet?
Yes.
That's new to me.
Yeah, Matt, this is Steve. I think if the board finds that to be sort of incompatible, I think you ought to comment on it, and we can investigate this because I think there's an interpretation issue that's not quite right here. I mean, we see windows much less than 5 feet in from a property line all the time without these extension walls. So it may have to do with the fire rating of the window, the fire rating of the new construction and of the wall that's
Yeah.
adjacent to the property line. But if you all could comment on whether or not, all things being equal, you think it's compatible or not, we can investigate with the code officials whether that's truly necessary or not, or whether there's an alternative means to achieve the fire.
Yeah, I would think that would be prudent, Steve, for you all to investigate the applicant, the efficacy of this solution.
Yeah. And by the way, we are totally okay with removing that extension if needed.
I mean, everything else, I mean, the way the front's been improved and stuff, fine. But this jumps out at me as, and I know the rear yard is not necessarily nearly as hot a topic as the front of the building, but it just jumps out at me as something which is most unusual and not terribly neighborly. to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Right. I would
Does
agree.
the 5-foot extension up beyond the roof, is that an issue for you?
It's not the vertical, it's the
Okay.
horizontal. that I'm
Yeah,
fine with.
yeah, we can totally, if code allows it, we can totally remove it.
I mean, I could even see it be a trellis with plantings if you're growing up on vines and those things, if you're
That could be
interested in
nice, yeah.
softening that, but there's
Yeah.
got to be a better solution.
Yeah, I would agree that it's the large, dark surface that just feels
Sort of
ominous and doesn't feel
Darth
neighborly.
Vader arriving in the backyard there.
Yes, yes, it's not friendly. Right. Right. So, any other questions on this? We've sort of started deliberation already. We can continue deliberation if there are no other questions.
I'm good.
Okay. I would make a motion that we approve the concept with the condition that the staff work with the applicant to determine whether or not this extension of the sidewall is necessary, and if it's not, that it be cut back or replaced with something more permeable, such as a trellis. Does that
Yeah,
answer?
I think, yeah, I think they can work with Steve, like Steve said. I think that would be useful to just figure out the better way. But I don't think to me it shouldn't hold up the approval.
Okay. And is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay. Thanks. I think that was Bill who seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Great. So the motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. We're ready for our next application at 75 Adams Street Northwest.
Yes,
Staff
that's me
ready to
again.
present?
Yep.
Great, Brendan.
Again, Brendan Meyer with the Historic Preservation Office. This case is for 75 Adams Street Northwest in the Bloomingdale Historic District. It's a contributing building in the Bloomingdale Historic District. Case number 24-436. David Bloom, District Architecture Studio, acting as agent on behalf of the owner, seeks concept approval for a new 2-story accessory building and small rear addition at 75 Adams Street. 75 Adams Street is the end house of a row of 6 houses built in 1907. So 75 Adams Street sits at one of the access alleys to the interior of the square. The applicant proposes to build a 2-story accessory building 20 feet tall at the rear of the lot. The structure would have a garage door on the north elevation at the first floor. And it would be clad with fiber cement lap siding on all sides without trim or ornamentation. And there'll be a pair of casement windows at the second floor. Notable in the design is that the west elevation of the accessory building would be seamless with a party fence built on the property line between the rear yard and the alley using the same materials. So the lap siding material will be continuous from the accessory building to the fence along the alley to the small rear addition to the row house. The rear addition itself is small enough and secondary enough that if not for the accessory dwelling, the small addition by itself would be approvable by staff as a delegated approval. In general, the board. Another thing to note about the design is that there is a roll-up gate called for in the fence. along this north-south alley, which is uncommon to have a roll-up gate separate from a garage. There's some uncertainty. Staff has some uncertainty that DDOT, which regulates public space, would allow a vehicle roll-up gate on such a narrow alley. We'll leave that to the DDOT reviewers to consider. As a compatibility issue, since it's generally the same height as the fence, it doesn't raise a compatibility. The roll-up gate itself, by itself, doesn't raise a compatibility issue with staff. In terms of the accessory building, the board has regularly approved two-story accessory buildings in Bloomingdale as consistent with the board's design guidelines for the historic district. The board recently approved a two-story accessory building at 11 Adams Street at the other end of this alley. That approval was in 2023. The board's guidelines for Bloomingdale identify the alleys as generally utilitarian and lacking special architectural value. Alleys are generally utilitarian. Historically, such garages and accessory buildings were built with building grade materials that were conveniently at hand to the builders or surplus from building the house at the front. So the materials of historic accessory buildings were typically secondary for sure. The dimensions and material selection of this proposal is generally consistent with what we'd expect to find in historic accessory buildings. So therefore, the HPO recommends that the review board approve the concept to build a 20-foot tall two-story accessory building and a small rear addition at 75 Adams Street and delegate final approval to staff. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Is the applicant ready to present? Do we have the applicant?
Madam Chair, he is at the meeting. He might have to unmute his microphone, but he is in the video. His video is up.
We can't hear you.
I'll try to send him a message through the chat.
Okay.
His microphone appears on according to the icons, so I'm a little unclear why we can't hear him.
Yeah, it looks like he's not muted, but there's some difficulty on his end.
Madam Chair, I'll suggest something.
Mhm.
Staff originally intended to put this on the consent calendar, but we received some objection from a constituent. So to provide an opportunity for public testimony, we put it on the agenda. If not for that, we would have recommended that this go on the consent calendar. And obviously consent calendar items don't require the presentation of the applicant.
Okay, I didn't see that person registered to speak, but is that the letter that's in the file?
Let me investigate for 1 second.
Okay. We have that if
Yes,
the
there's
objection.
there's a letter on file from Joe Levesque,
Mhm.
which describes project at Bloomingdale Civic Association. That's not the ANC, that's a civic association.
Mhm.
And then
Okay.
the position is Joe Levesque's alone. So he speaks for himself.
Okay. Mm. Did this person have the opportunity to talk to the owner applicant about their issues?
I cannot say.
Okay. Wasn't sure if you were aware. Okay. Did the applicant, do you want to try going out and coming back in and see if that helps? If you can hear us? Or you can try calling in.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can now, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I had to call you on my phone for some reason.
Mhm.
But thank you for your time. This is Dave Bloom with District Architecture. I'll quickly just highlight a few things. I think Brendan summarized our proposal pretty well. I would clarify that between the proposed accessory building and the main building, that the wood fencing would be cedar fencing. So the lap siding would not be continuous across the along the alley, but it would be broken up by the cedar fence. And the proposed rear addition is replacing what was the original enclosed porches of the building. It doesn't extend any farther back than those original structures. And I think I'll leave my comments to that unless you have any questions.
Okay. Board members have questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe it's appropriate to direct it to staff. I visited the site recently and it appeared to be under construction actively. There were permits in the window and there was a team there doing demolition. I guess could you clarify kind of what the status of that is?
Yes, the owner's representative has obtained a few permits already. Those include a partial demo permit underpinning. I believe if he hasn't already, I think he was applying for a permit to replace the existing windows. And he might have a framing permit, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, Brendan, if you could just confirm that's consistent with what's being presented today.
Yeah, I can confirm that. The permits described are typically approved at the staff level, delegated authority. About 90% of building permit applications are approved by staff in that way. About 10% of building permit applications come before the board. This is pretty standard sort of breaking down the project into multiple permits. Once they got to this permit, they reached the extent of what staff could approve under our delegated authority. And because it's a two-story new structure, it requires review by the board.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, is the board ready to deliberate?
Sure.
Okay. Um, I, we don't, as I said, we don't have anybody registered to speak on this application, but we did have the letter in the file from a neighbor who was not in support of the project. So we've seen through that letter their issues. I am still in support of this and will support the staff report and ask for a second.
Second.
Is that a second? Okay. So a second from Matt Bell. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
All right. We're ready to move to Mapleview in the Anacostia Historic District. Amania, is that you?
It is. I don't know what happened to me. Turn
All
my camera.
I'll let you make your presentation.
All right. So welcome back. This is 1220 Mapleview Southeast in the Anacostia Historic District. The property is located on the corner of Mount View Place and Mapleview Place. It was built in 1902 as a two-family dwelling. It was owned by a shopkeeper at St. E's, and it's a Victorian style property. It's one of our oldest properties, still standing in the Anacostia Historic District. However, it has not been occupied since the 1980s. After being owned and neglected by the district for years, for decades actually, ownership of the property was transferred to the L'Enfant Trust, a citywide nonprofit historic preservation organization, in 2018. The transfer was initiated based on the trust's successful rehabilitation of other long deteriorated properties in the Anacostia Historic District. And they have been rehabilitated and sold since. 1220 has sat vacant for over 30 years and has significant deterioration issues. The house leans considerably east due to a partial collapse of the east foundation wall. The interior has been gutted to the studs, which contributed to the structure's instability. In 2014, the city shored up the property in the interior primarily, and partially rebuilt the west foundation, but failed to make or didn't make any other repairs or reinforcements to the east wall. Based on the engineer's report, the roof, the attic, and the second story have sustained the most damage over the years. The applicant is proposing to deconstruct the attic and roof, second floor, while retaining and straightening the first floor. The connections between the joists and walls have been compromised. So there's going to be a considerable demolition of those. The plan allows or enables the applicant to safely return the first floor plumbs, as well as trying to attempt to straighten the building as well. And all the proposed demolition will remove approximately 45% of the existing structure. The applicant has proposed, of course, to salvage and reuse any of the historic districts, historic materials if they can. If materials cannot be preserved, they'll be replicated in time. The applicant has also proposed to restore key decorative elements such as the brackets and the porch columns. And the applicant will install lateral bracing and shoring system to safely dismantle and temporarily stabilize the property. The proposal to remove and reconstruct this property is warranted due to the building's current state of disrepair. The partial collapse of the east foundation wall and the significant structural damage sustained over the years makes this project urgent. to prevent a total loss of this historically significant property. The applicant has undertaken extensive research and consideration to find the most viable and sensitive solution to preserving as much of the original state as possible. It was carefully crafted based off of other plans and represents a really thoughtful compromise to rebuilding this and stabilizing the building. Focusing on deconstructing the attic and the first floor, or the second floor, I'm sorry, and straightening the first floor. The proposal minimizes the need for a complete demolition, which is what we all really want. The project plans to reflect a commitment to preservation and adherence to reconstruction standards. The applicant's experience in restoring historic homes in Anacostia and the collaboration with historic preservation trades ensures that the replications will be executed to the best standards. And HBO is recommending that the board find the proposal consistent with the purpose of the Preservation Act. I wanted to just pause real quick before letting LaFont Trust speak to say how grateful we are that LaFont Trust is and has taken the time to approach the situation of demolition by neglect from the city and turn it around to retain a property in the Anacostia Historic District. A lot of homes in Anacostia have not been able to be saved or considered in this way to preserve. And so this is a really great opportunity to just show how rehabilitation and reconstruction can be done on a historic building. So I'll let LaFont Trust talk about the process and how they reach this. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Amania. Good afternoon, Chairperson Heath and members of the board. My name is Lauren McHale. I'm president of the L'Enfant Trust, and the L'Enfant Trust is owner of 1220 Mapleview Place Southeast. The first slide here, I didn't pull up the architectural plans because they're very basic at this point, but they are part of your packet. But I do have some photos here that I think will be of interest to you. Our historic properties redevelopment program started in 2012, and we've done 5 projects so far. 3 of those 5 were formerly owned by the city, and 1220 Mapleview, or Big Green as the neighborhood calls her, will be our 6th project, and also was formerly owned by the city. This shows a few of our past projects before and afters of some of those homes that we've done in the neighborhood just a few blocks away from Big Green. Next slide, please. So far, our team consists of general contractor Allenville Incorporated. Our project architect is Cunningham Quill Architects, structural engineer Silman, shoring engineer Atlas Foundations of Washington, geotechnical engineer Ponds and Associates, and our restoration specialist is Adrian Smoot Edwards of Regeneracy Incorporated. Next slide. In 2014, while the property was owned by the city, interior shoring was added and a section of the west foundation wall was rebuilt and a new temporary roof installed. According to the plans we've obtained for that stabilization work, only a portion of it was done. So that has contributed to some of the structural issues that we're facing today. The property was fully gutted prior to the city's ownership of the property. And you can see here the extent of framing inside the house on all 3 levels. And it has definitely held the property up for many years, but we're starting to see deterioration and beyond, that will require a lot more work beyond what has been done so far. Next slide, please. Originally, our structural engineers at Silman had presented 2 options for us. Option A was to deconstruct and rebuild the entire structure with salvaged and new materials. or B, a sequenced rebuilding of the structure that would entail separating existing connections, replacing deteriorated framing, and reconstructing plumb walls in small sections along the length of the building. We have, of course, did not want to have to take this building down at all. And so our preference was option B, to do kind of a sequenced rebuilding. But we also did some further investigation, and we worked with Scaffold Resource on a proposal that would have removed some of the interior shoring on the inside and constructing 3 steel towers on the west side of the house. On the east side, wailers would be installed, and then steel rods would be threaded through the building. The rods would be gradually tightened to hopefully straighten the house. That was going to be a very expensive and complicated project, and we ultimately decided against that plan because there was really no guarantee that it would successfully pull the house back to plumb, and there was concern about the safety of the neighboring property. And so that leads us to option C, which is dismantling and rebuilding only the attic and second floor. As mentioned in the staff report and seen here in these images, the roof and attic and second floor have suffered the most damage over the years, and there's very little salvageable material left. And we believe that removing the weight of the attic and the second floor will allow us to straighten the first floor and rebuild the foundation with more ease and less risk to the neighboring property. Next slide, please. Our geotechnical engineers at Pons and Associates have been monitoring the movement of the building with survey targets and crack gauges. Their last report showed eastward movement of between 0.1 and 0.36 inches and separation between the interior east foundation wall and adjacent wood bracing between 1/8 to 7/8 of an inch. And this work was installed in May, and we've been doing monthly readings since then. Given the movement and the rapid deterioration of the structure, we feel it's imperative to dismantle the second floor and attic to protect the neighboring property and to safely rehabilitate the remaining first floor and basement levels. The images here, the image to the left shows the east foundation wall in the basement. You can see where it has buckled, causing that significant lean towards the east and the neighboring property. You can also see that there's very little space between the 2 houses, which further complicates things. There's only about 2 feet 11 inches on our, of our property, and then of course there's a pretty, maybe a little bit more on the neighbor's side, but we're working with about 6 feet, 6 to 7 feet between the houses. So it's a small space. Next slide, please. Big Green retains some very special details, including decorative window dressings, eave brackets, and fish scale shingles. All of the original elements will be carefully removed for restoration or replication. And we're very fortunate to have found the original porch columns inside the house. They're all there and in very good condition. And so those will be restored and then installed on the recreated wraparound front porch. So we're very excited to be able to restore those elements. I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. McHale. The work you're doing here is great, and commend you for this rehabilitation and for the detailed presentation to walk us through it. Any questions from board members?
I don't have any right now.
Okay. All right, then if there are no questions right now, we do have both Greta Fuller and Rebecca Miller registered to speak. So again, we'll hear from Ms. Fuller and then Ms. Miller in that order.
Oh, Thank you again. Justice Greta Fuller, Historic Anacostia Preservation Society co-president. I believe that Ms. Price Amania from the Historic Preservation Office and the LaFont Trust, Lauren McCall, gave a great presentation and an overview of why this needs to happen, and it needs to happen soon. I did write a letter, and I won't go through that letter. I'll just basically say that we concur with the staff report wholeheartedly, and that at the risk of losing that structure and the house next door, we really can't see any other way of this happening and saving the house and ensuring that hopefully we can get it back up and people living in it again. I'd like to thank the LaFont Trust for all the work that they've done in the community. And actually, also the Historic Preservation Office and everyone that's been a part of saving this property. We did lose a property across the street from it by, I heard that the board approved the raise where the Southeast House. So if we lost this property, it would be very detrimental to the Historic Anacostia stock. Once again, we appreciate everything, and HAPS concurs and agrees with the staff report and what LaFont Trust wants to do. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Greta. All right. Rebecca Miller.
Thank you. Rebecca Miller, Executive Director of the DC Preservation League. We are supportive of the L'Enfant Trust plans for this building. I know that they've tried just about everything. This is a building that has been highlighted as one of DC's most endangered places on DC's list. I think, not to go into too much, or I guess continue to beat this dead horse, but demolition by neglect continues to be a tremendous issue in the District of Columbia with regards to historic properties. You saw it last month, of course, with the property across the street. You saw it just in a previous case. This was not obviously the fault of the L'Enfant Trust, but from the city holding this property for decades. So it's something that we really need to get a handle on, and we welcome the board's support as we move forward in trying to work on that particular issue. But I just wanted to offer our support because the L'Enfant Trust is an excellent organization who does great work across the Anacostia and the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for either of the witnesses this afternoon? All right. Thank you both. Any final questions for the applicant before we deliberate? And then I'll ask board members to turn on your cameras, and in the interest of moving with deliberate speed, as we've heard is necessary on this project, I will make a motion that we approve the staff report and ask for a second.
I second that motion.
Thank you. That was Gabrielle Miller, second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, great. The motion carries. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the L'Enfant Trust for your work here and around the district.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you to you too.
Good to see you, Lauren.
Bye, Bill.
All right, we've reached our lunch break. It's now 12:15. We have 20 minutes for lunch, so we're a little bit behind schedule, but we can still start in 20 minutes, so that would be at 12:35. We'll come back for our last hearing. See you all then.